I can't say for sure we saved the best for last, but it's quite possible that's the case, because what we're dealing with here is music that's not as old in time as some of the genres we've talked about today, like blues and some of the older stuff, but that, despite some folks' misconceptions, really is part of a tradition that goes deep back in American history, and more to the point, African American history. We have a panel comprised, I don't know that many cats of the local scene, but we have a panel comprised of three of the most sterling, and I'll just briefly introduce them to you and let them take over. Our moderator is a young man that you may know by his DJ handle, DJ Flash Parks Gordon, also known as Jason Woods, right here. You can find him at all kinds of places around town spinning records, and not only does he spin records, this guy consistently brings a Houston-centric focus to what he's doing. He doesn't exclusively play Houston music, but he reminds you where he's from and where you're from. And so one of our panelists is Jason Woods, our moderator. To his left is Mako Faneuil, whom I got to know some years ago, and Mako's a native Houstonian. He got his bachelor's degree at Texas A&M. He earned a master's at TSU, and I got to meet him when he was writing his master's thesis. These days, he's back in Houston working on his dissertation. He's finished his coursework at Rutgers University and will soon be a PhD. He is also the author of an excellent book that's out there on the shelf called Hip Hop in Houston. Mako Faneuil. And a young man I had the pleasure to meet a few years ago who is a native of one of my favorite places, not Houston, but just south of here, down on the island of Galveston. He's BOI, as we say down there, born on island. He's been living in Brooklyn, New York for about the last 10 years or so. Lance Scott Walker is writes all kinds of stuff, but for our purposes, he's the author of the writer that's part of a project called Houston Rap, the book Houston Rap, and Houston Rap Tapes. And several people earlier have mentioned DJ Screw. Lance has currently got a book project underway on DJ Screw. Folks, these folks know a lot about what they speak, and I'm going to let them take over now. Thank you. Let's welcome them one more time.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Like Roger said, my name is Jason Woods, and it's an honor to be sitting on this panel with these two guys. Their knowledge on hip-hop is very important to the culture. One thing about hip-hop that I think is very important is it encompasses every single genre before it. So while you guys were hearing all this rich history about blues, soul, rock, and funk, and wherever else, just think about Houston hip-hop embodying all of that. So all of those great legends like Lightning Hopkins, I feel, was probably one of the earliest examples of hip-hop, even though during his time it wasn't hip-hop, but he invoked the same spirit that the hip-hop generation took forth. So we want to dive right into it. Want to play some records for you guys to kind of give you an example of some of the earliest entries into hip-hop. Lance, let's start with you in terms of early hip-hop.
Mm-hmm.
What's the earliest that you know?
Well, I think Mako and I were working on our books at the same time, and I think both of us were really looking for early records as an example. We were both trying to find, okay, well, what's the first hip-hop record? What's the first, the earliest Houston hip-hop record? And a lot of people told us, well, McGregor Park.
Right.
McGregor Park's the earliest one. That was the earliest a lot of people could remember. That record came out in 1985, and I think for a long time we thought that was the first.
Right.
You told me about one that you're going to play
right.
from kind of what's sort of an outlier group. A couple of guys that were here. You'll tell the story, but
right.
But I've discovered a couple of other records going back. Houston historian and MC, the late MC Wicked Cricket, told me about when he first got here from New York in the late '70s. how in the cafes that would eventually start hosting people freestyling and eventually kind of start moving towards the same DJs and audience that would become hip hop. There were funk and boogie bands playing in those cafes, and that's
Right.
what people were hearing. And as it turns out, there's a direct connection between that and what eventually did become hip hop. The people that were producing it and the people that were involved. Glass Band. We hear about. Cut an early record in Houston in 1983. They had kind of a funk boogie record. One of the main producers and players there, who was also in a group called Perfect Time, and his name is Mickey Blue.
Right.
John Kenneth Williams. A lot of people know him by different names. Johnny Boy. He went on to produce Car Freak, which is the first Ghetto Boys record.
Right.
And another group that was circulating in that whole kind of scene was a group called Chance. And in 1982, 83, Kids Jam, a radio show premiered on KTSU, TSU's radio station, a Saturday morning hip-hop program. And in 1983, Jazzy Red, a rapper originally his family's from Beaumont, but he identifies with Fourth Ward, came on the show, and he was the master rapper. And so they had, DJs that would play on the show, and they had people that hosted it and everything. But he was the guy who every week he would write a rap, and he would come in the studio and rap. And these guys from the group Chance heard him rapping, and then got in touch with him and said, "Hey, we're doing a record called Breakdancing. Do you want to rap on it?" That record came out in 1984. So that's the earliest example I can find. The same year that Captain Jack is a Houston MC who goes all the way back to the 60s in the clubs of Ray Barnett, Charles Bush. He goes way back. He cut kind of an electro record that same year. The original definition of electro clash, which has more in common probably with disco than it does hip hop, but he was an MC.
Right.
So there's that connection. But the breakdancing record by the Chance Band featuring Jazzy Red's the earliest one I can find until you told me about that one.
So the record that Lance is talking about, it was a record by the name of by a group called Brothers Disco, and the tune was called Thumpin'. And prior to this, like Lance mentioned, McGregor Park was all I ever heard about.
Yeah.
I have an interesting story about that as well. But back to the Brothers Disco record. This record came out in 1981, and it was on a label called Just Fresh, which was a local label. Ran out of Sunnyside, in between Fifth Ward and Sunnyside.
Mm-hmm.
The guy frequent. But I ended up finding one of the artists whose name is Robert Harkness, who went by Rob O. And he hit me up on Instagram and kind of gave me a little backstory behind the record. Originally, him and his brother were from the Bronx, New York, and they ended up attending TSU, Texas Southern University, for school. And the owner of Just Fresh Records actually came to the campus one day and approached them about making a record. Like, do you guys know how to rap? Like, it's, I guess in his eyes, a gimmick, because prior to that, Just Fresh had put out, funk and soul and various things, but now it was their opportunity to cash in on this rap wave that was going on. So Rob O and his Harry O actually, and Rob Ski, that was the name, classic hip hop names.
Yeah.
They recorded this record, and if the sound is up, I'd like to just give you a taste of what it sounded like. Is that okay? All right. This is hip hop, so we can be, call and response. Yeah, all right, there we go.
Yeah.
I'm the R.O.B., the S.K.I. With the Brothers Disco, but that's no lie. I'm the AJ, up on the Watch That Show. With the Brothers Disco, and we're ready to go. Here we go. Get loose, get loose. Let all your people game. Check this out. We're gonna give a demonstration and turn it out. So you listen to what we have to say, and we guarantee it'll make you say So you listen to the voice of the two MCs. The show shot beat the picture on your knees. With Harry O, we're on the show with Rob.
All right, that's just a little taste of what they were doing back in '81. Leave it up. All right. Mako, you want to kind of talk about just that style, particularly?
So, That sounds something like I would hear out of New York, and I think what's interesting about that is a lot of early Houston hip hop. When I say early Houston hip hop, like 80, 86, 87, and prior to that, it mimicked a lot of what was coming out of the East Coast. And so if we look at the Ghetto Boys' first album, Making Trouble, they look like a broke down. they look like Run DMC, and so which took their style from the Blues Brothers, and so and their DJ producer was from Trenton, New Jersey, and so it had a sound.
And one of the rappers.
Yeah, and one of the rappers also. So it was a sound that wasn't germane to Houston, but more like, what people were familiar with at that time. And so that's what I hear in this song, and particularly when people are trying to make a quick buck. The song that we know of that was first played on the radio or was popularized on the radio, Rapper's Delight, was an effort to make a quick buck. Sylvia Robinson wanted to make a quick buck, and this was a prayer answered, according to Dan Charnas, who writes about this. But there's no unique Houston sound. I would say there's no unique Houston sound until around 1993 or with ESG, UGK, Mr. 3-2. Prior to that, Houston was mimicking what was already popular.
And I think it's real interesting that the very first recording of rap in Houston came from two guys outside of Houston, so two New Yorkers. And then moving on, like Lance was mentioning, the next record that was a little bit more popular, because that particular record that I just played, it wasn't something that you would hear on the radio or the average Houstonian knew per se. But it's interesting to know that sound existed long before 1985, which you could talk a little bit about the LA rapper creating a song attributed to McGregor Park.
Right, 1985.
Right.
Yeah, McGregor Park came out, and this is where McGregor Park on the south side of Houston, south of McGregor Way, and south of there is South Park. The neighborhood that we know a lot of rappers come from. That song became so popular because that's where the parties were, and the song talked about those parties. Daryl Scott was the Houston DJ. He was a club DJ and a mixtape DJ in Houston who used to slow down his records. And in fact, a lot of those guys, even the guys who were on Kids Jams, used to slow down their records. They didn't call it screwing a record; they just slowed them down. But he would sell his mixtapes at McGregor Park and have these huge parties that would get busted all the time, and they'd always get run out of there. And that's what the song talked about. So it was a really popular record, and for so many people, it was the first time they heard anything from Houston that was, that talked about Houston, talked about the streets they drove down, and that was going to be something that would pop up on, and often again in the music, for generations, and still does today.
And I think that's one of the most unique things about the song is that it's a uniquely Houston song that talks about the pleasures of living in Houston. And so the hook goes, McGregor Park, that's where I want to be. McGregor Park, my car, my freak and me. McGregor Park, on Sundays it's the place. McGregor Park, something, 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 something. But it's a young cat driving down Martin Luther King Boulevard. He's talking about going to pick up his girl at the time, and they're riding in his car. He's playing the music loud, and this is 1985, and so we would see this theme in the next song that in Car Freak by the Ghetto Boys, and then but Houston's car culture is talked about that early, and like Lance said, it's for a period of time you couldn't be a Houston rapper without talking about the car culture that is not only just something for black and brown communities, but we are a city that is addicted to cars, and that's what the guys were rapping about, just the pleasures of everyday life, and navigating the vicissitudes of life in Houston by slowing everything down in your car.
So right now I'm gonna play a little bit of McGregor Park by the LA rapper.
Are you out there? McGregor Park is the place to be.
McGregor Park is where I got to be. McGregor Park, my car, my freaking me. McGregor Park, there ain't no time to waste. McGregor Park, 'cause on Sundays it's the race, y'all.
You hear that production in there?
Yeah.
Nice intro. What I find interesting about this particular tune, the first one is a New York style. The second one is LA. It's like first we get New York's interpretation, and then we have the interpretation of a LA native transplant.
Yeah.
Like his understanding, his view of car culture here in Houston.
But you know what's funny? The guy is actually, he went to Yates.
Yeah, he's from Houston.
He's not a.
He
yeah,
just calls himself the LA rapper.
Oh wow.
So if you look on the, I couldn't find him until after the book, but he went to Yates High School.
Okay.
And the album, I think the address is on the cover. The album was recorded in South Park.
Right.
Yeah, it's Robert Harlan, and then there's another name that it goes by, but it's a guy that comes like out of Houston. He was in high school at the time.
That was all he did. It was just that record, and then he dropped out.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's amazing because all the time, it's amazing how he took the LA perspective though, because the record is very like kind
It's
of
very Houston.
electro. But I mean in terms of the production.
Yeah, true.
You
They
know.
call themselves he says they're the Hollywood Clique.
Wow.
That's the name that he uses on there. Yeah.
Maybe he was talking about the Hollywood convenience store. That's where he bought his incense. Yeah.
Montrose.
So next I want to bring up this group by a person who I think is, still an amazing, legendary rapper in the city, K Reno. But prior to him going solo, and he was also in several different groups, most famously the South Park Coalition. But early on, his first group, Real Chill, which to my knowledge is the first group recording out of Houston, talking about from Houston, doing music in Houston.
They all came out within like
A few months of each other.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was 86. So I don't know what came out first, but
This came out and then maybe Car Freak, but it was around the same time.
But Car Freak is 87, right?
No,
86.
Yeah, 86.
You sure?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Not sure.
Yeah.
Not after that look. I'm not sure.
Car Freak is an iteration of the Ghetto Boys that never existed after that one song.
No, I know,
Yeah,
but I have the record.
Oh,
It
yeah,
says
yeah.
87 though.
But yeah, there's some history behind
Okay,
it. Yeah,
you know. So, but right now I want to play this this group called Real Chill, which you want to kind of intro it.
K Reno is a Houston rapper who it's interesting to bring him in at this point because when McGregor Park came out, that was what a lot of people saw as one of the first recorded outputs. But in truth, there was a huge Houston scene already going on in lots of clubs. Steve Fournier was a Houston DJ. He doesn't DJ anymore. He's still around. Who was DJing at clubs on the north side, Struts, Disco, Bone Shakers, and drawing really, really big crowds. But, as we all know in the club industry, a lot of times, somebody will go in there to make some money. They'll fill the place up, and as soon as the attendance starts to fall off, they cash out and they get out of there. And so that happened a couple times. And then he was approached by a guy who wanted to open a club over near the Astrodome in what was an old club space. And Steve Fournier came in there and said, okay, do this, and this, and then I'll bring my people here. And so that was the Rhinestone Wrangler, which they opened up on Merworth, right in the shadow of the Astrodome, I think on the west side of the Astrodome. And that was where everybody in Houston started to go, and they were battle rapping. You know, they would have a contest. I mean, they would go in there to listen to music. He was playing strictly rap music.
On Sundays, right?
On Sunday nights was the contest. It was called the Rap Attack Contest. And what they would do is they would have like a rap contest, and you'd come into the door and you'd have to sign up. Okay, I'm going to be in the rap contest, and maybe 10 people would be in the rap contest. And then at the very end of the night, I think maybe close to 2 a.m., they would do what they would, would be like the capping contest, rank rapping. And so then everybody would get, around in a circle and they would rank rappers. And so this, what it did was so people would write rhymes to specifically belittle and insult their opponents, all in good fun. But it made them really good rappers, and it made them really, really concise and really vicious and venomous in their lyricism. And there's no better example of that than K Reno, who would write raps and Willie D from the Ghetto Boys, who would write raps specifically to tear down their opponents so they wouldn't come back the next week. And I think it probably worked. And so this is K Reno early on, but he was one of those early battle rappers.
And I think what's important about what Lance is saying is that we think about historical context. Okay, so in 2016, the way that we access music is, we have music on our phones. Okay, so Solange dropped her album on Thursday night. I just went to my Apple Music and I listened to it from there. We have SoundCloud, and so this is before radio stations played hip hop. So can you imagine that 30 years ago, black R&B stations were like, we're never playing hip hop. Mm-hmm. And I always laugh when I hear it on Tom Joyner in the morning, because I'm like, y'all are not gonna play hip hop because they thought hip hop was gonna die. So the only way to hear this music was through Kids Jam or through the club. And so this is before, so someone can grow up now and say, they grow up and say, I wanna be a rapper, okay? This wasn't a career move at this particular time. These were young people having fun. This is part of youth culture of the late 70s and the early 80s or whatever. And so the fact that it goes on wax, this is something that, there were probably better rappers, but they didn't decide to put this stuff on wax or to commodify it. Yeah.
I also like to point out that Houston has always had all of the elements that every other major city had, but I don't think a lot of people think of this city in terms of that, like the battle rapping, the DJ culture, the graffiti, like all the elements that go into making hip hop what it is existed well on, as a part of the whole inception of hip hop nationwide. Like we were right there on the threshold of everything.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna play just a small piece of this Real Chill record featuring K Reno. It's called Rockin' It.
Beside the point in the joint is where I rock. Give me time when I rhyme, so stop the clock. I'm the choice with the voice that would never fail. Beat the devil in his head, send him straight to hell. The rhyme writer, not a biter, I'm the all-time best. The greatest Kappa Def rapper who would settle for less. The mic wizard like a blizzard, I will destroy. The sucker killer, crowd thriller, I'm the real McCoy. My name is James, call me Jay, cause that's what I like. Bite this rhyme and I bust it in the head with the mic. The smartest artist rockin' hard.
I just want to play K Reno's verse though.
You can't crack me, I got this.
Rockin' it. Rockin' it. Rockin' it. Rockin' it.
Like the fire party, my performance can be graded. First you anticipated, then go home and restate it. Suckers try to fight us, smiling handers from us writers. My voice is so strong, I can rock with laryngitis. Alright, who can ducker, get rowdy on occasion. Influencing your body with my hectic persuasion. I run you through the ringer, insult you with my finger. I hum you a line, I'm a rapper and a singer. I'm the K to the dash R-I-N-O. I'm a strolling dollar phoning cause I'm rolling in dough. Sucker killer, party filler cause I'm oh so chill. Got my trick up my sleeve and David Copperfield. When we start with
I really wanted to play that to prove that K Reno has always been light years ahead of the competition. This is 1986, and I mean,
He's still active.
Yeah, I mean, and still tearing down mics.
Yeah, and I think only Zero would be the competition, but I think he's recorded more rap albums than anybody in Houston by a long shot.
Definitely.
Zero is second, and one of his collaborators, Ashley Mayadia, is here today too. 36 albums, yeah. Yeah,
Right.
There you go.
That just came out this year.
Yeah, right.
Amazing. So, let's as we move down the timeline from the Brothers Disco to LA Rapper to Real Chill as being some of the earliest recordings of hip hop, then we move towards what's probably the golden era, I guess we can say, in Houston, like where Houston becomes known on the national stage of hip hop. You guys want to introduce that? I know you cover a lot in your book, Mako.
Yeah.
About that period.
Yeah. So in my book, I intentionally stopped in 1991. So I cover a period from about 1979 to 1991. I stopped in 91 because that was a good way to track change over time. So from being a city that wasn't known for hip hop to about 1991 being a city, being a significant hip hop center. And one of the major reason for that is because there's a group called the Ghetto Boys, whose home base is in Fifth Ward, because of the owner, James Smith at the time, but James Prince, came out of Fifth Ward, Texas. And so you have Don Roby that comes out of Fifth Ward in the 1940s with Duke Peacock Records, and then we have Rap-A-Lot Records, independent label out of Houston, Texas, and they call themselves the Ghetto Boys. I think what's interesting about this that Houston rappers in the 80s and 90s were still rapping about spaces that they lived in for almost 100 years. And so these spaces, Fifth Ward is where people migrated to. And so where you have blues is migration music. Where you have, this is what these guys are rapping, are the guys who lived after the civil rights movement, after deindustrialization, in a period of neoliberalism, in a period where Houston has disinvested from the spaces where black and brown people lived. And so they call themselves the Ghetto Boys. And they're rapping about the good and also some of the bad of that time. And the particular song that took the nation by storm was a song called "My Mind's Playing Tricks on Me." And so where it's Scarface, Willie D, and Bushwick Bill rapping about manic depression and rapping about how like everyday life can make one crazy. All of us experience that, right? But they're rapping about like are they really experiencing what they think they're experiencing, and is their mind playing tricks on them? And the guy who kind of writes most of it, he was really manic depressive, and he's a genius, a musical genius. And so this group, the third iteration of the group, the Ghetto Boys, they are the ones who put Houston on the map. Anywhere that I travel, people are always talking about the Ghetto Boys. I taught in prisons in New Jersey, and the guys would always like, "You're from Houston, you know this, da 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 da." They knew more of the lyrics than I did. I was only like 11 years old when this came out, but like this song, "Mind's Playing Tricks on Me," is probably the second song that I knew by heart because it was played on the radio, and it was at a time when I wanted to be like cool, and that was the cool thing to do.
Mm-hmm. So if you've never, ever, ever heard this song, here's your opportunity right now.
I sit alone in my four-cornered room staring at candles. Who got man? We on the radio, dude? Yeah. Oh, all right. The peep is here. At night I can't sleep. I toss and turn. Candlesticks in the dark. Visions of bodies being burned. Four walls closing in, getting bigger. I'm paranoid, sleeping with my finger on the trigger. My mother's always stressing I ain't living right, but I ain't going out without a fight. See, every time my eyes close, I start sweating and blood starts coming out my nose. It's somebody watching the act, but I don't know who it is, so I'm watching my back. I can see them when I'm deep in the covers. When I awake, I hear a car burning rubber.
It's okay to nod your head if you're feeling the beat.
A black suit and a cane like my own. Some might say take a chill beat, but I can't, G, cause there's somebody trying to kill me. I'm popping in the clip when the wind blows. Every 20 seconds got me peeping out my window. Investigating the joint for traps. Checking my telephone for taps. I'm staring at the woman on the corner. It's messed up when your mind is playing tricks on you.
So I want to point out that particularly like as far as production is concerned, because I think a lot of people have this misconception of Houston kind of being one-dimensional in terms of sound, or not as elaborate or layered in the production that comes out here, especially when dealing with hip-hop. The sample is an Isaac Hayes sample, which many people have used in hip-hop, but I definitely feel like the Ghetto Boys took this sample and made it synonymous with them. So anytime you hear this particular beat, you automatically associate Houston with it. And I think that's commendable on the production team. There's a lot of folklore surrounding who actually produced. Like, so many people want to take credit for the production of this particular record.
What I also want to say is commendable is he played the clean version for y'all.
I did.
Uh-huh.
I kept it
Respect
clean.
for his elders there.
And in terms of production, so out of this collective, the Rap-A-Lot producers, you get Mike Dean, who
Still producing number
still
one.
producing. So
number one record last week.
Beyonce's album Lemonade that came out this year was largely produced by Mike Dean, and Mike Dean produced for Kanye West. He's produced for a lot of people. So, you know, out of Houston, out of this particular time, there are a lot of the production that's comes out goes to define, you know, other genres of music.
Almost by default, all the Rap-A-Lot in-house production. You know, they produced all their records in-house. So I don't even know if they necessarily set out to do something in particular, but it was kind of like the Houston sound just developed because this white boy who smoked a lot of weed was in the studio playing bass and guitar and piano and just writing the records just the way he knew how. So really this one person in a lot of ways defined the Houston sound just by what he was hearing. And he still produced number one record last week, Travis Scott.
Right.
Yep.
So we're gonna, you know, just for sake of time, there's so much Houston hip hop I want to point out, guys. So many different layers and so many different pathways that we could go. But I want to talk about some of the most significant moments in Houston hip hop, which is going to bring me up to around the same time, DJ Screw, who was a protege of Daryl Scott at some point. Like Lance mentioned earlier, Daryl Scott was one of the first DJs in the city to slow the record down, not coining the name Screwed, or what we know as Screwed and Chopped, or, you know, things that other people such as Michael 5000 Watts and OG Ron C and just different people who have kind of expounded on that sound. But Lance, if you could just kind of like give us a breakdown of like the early inception of the Screwed Up clique.
Well, DJ Screw moved here from, he's from Smithville, Texas. He was born in Bastrop. He moved here in 1985 when all this stuff that we were talking about was happening. I don't know that he was necessarily aware of it, but he moved in to Houston, and he was on the south side. And in the late 1980s, you couldn't escape Daryl Scott. You couldn't not hear his tapes. If you were anywhere in the city, you heard people driving down. That's the way you hear a lot of Houston rap anyways, people driving around listening to it. So I don't know that he hadn't necessarily slowed a record down before he came to Houston, but certainly that was a big influence. Daryl Scott was slowing down records. Lester Pace was slowing down records. And so, you know, it was a sound that I think over time he was developing his his first mixtapes that he was doing when he first got to Houston they had some shout outs, but they were fast mixtapes. He wasn't doing the slowed down mixtapes. The first slowed down mixtapes he started doing in the apartment and he lived in with his father on South Side was 1990. And then I think probably around 1991, 1992, people started doing shout-outs. And then by 1992, somewhere late in 1992, people started actually coming in and freestyling over his tapes. So what he would do is he would set up, he had two turntables. He'd have two copies of the same record on the turntable. One of them he'd play a little bit behind the other one. And he'd have guys come in and they'd freestyle over the recordings, like Julie was explaining earlier. Record it to tape. Record that tape into an 8-track, and then take that tape and record that to another tape and slow it down in that process. So it wasn't actually slow when he recorded it; it was slow when he went back and recorded it. But by about 1993, the voices that were on these tapes, they were talking about the neighborhoods in Houston. They were talking about streets that they drove down. So people were listening for people talking about their neighborhoods and streets that they drove down, and the paint that they were putting on their cars, and the ways that they were customizing their cars. All this stuff was making it onto the tapes. So people got addicted to it. They got really into it, and the people who were on these tapes became superstars in their own neighborhoods. Some of them were already superstars, rapping in the streets, and some of them didn't really rap before. But it quickly became something that mirrored this culture that it was talking about. And people started lining up around his house. And by 1994, he lived in the neighborhood of Gulfcrest. Had a house over there, and by 1994, 1995, people are lining up for blocks, driving up to his house just to buy tapes through the gate. Of course, the police think he's dealing drugs, and he was dealing something illegal. He was putting people's music on tapes and selling it, but they kicked in his door. They didn't find anything a couple different times. They eventually ended up moving and opening a record store, but all the while, what he was doing was documenting this culture in real time, and he was super prolific, so there was lots and lots of it. He would do personal tapes for people. They'd come to him and say, okay, I want a tape. Here's my list. I want Ice Cube. I want Big Mike. I want all Mr. 3-2. I want these things on my tape. And he'd take that list and write their phone number down on it. He'd put it in his shoebox, and a week or two later, they'd get a phone call, and he'd say, come on over. I'm making your tape. And so they'd come over, and they'd get to do shout-outs. I don't think this was the case early on, but later on he'd do personal tapes for people. They'd come over, they'd get to do the shout-outs, and some people would be, freestyling on the tapes. And so he created this little cottage industry.
Right.
And eventually opened his store in 1998. And because, it was too much for the house. I mean, people speculate he sold millions of copies of June 27th, his most popular tape.
And that's not even to mention the bootlegs.
And people making bootlegs off of them, yeah.
Because Jason, you're from the north side, right?
No, I'm from the south side.
I thought you were from the north.
Come on,
get it
man,
twisted.
South side.
So I'm only person from the north side, not north side. And
North
so,
side.
I mean, we bootleg tapes on the north side. And I mean, I had an original DJ Screw tape before, but I know I bootlegged it I bootleg copies of it. And so there's a distinction because, as you know, north side of Houston is a whole nother world, than the south side of Houston. And so there's another culture that develops on that side of town.
Because if you were from the north side, you couldn't get into
we
DJ
couldn't
Screw's house.
Yeah, we couldn't get
You weren't going in.
Yeah. There was a fight, they
Civil War.
What's that?
It was like
It was a civil war.
Yeah.
North versus south.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So
he married someone from the north side, so he got it right.
So, it's been a treaty since then. But right now, I just want to play one of the most significant members out of the Screwed Up Clique. To me, when I was in high school, is when I first got turned on to the tapes. This guy, his voice was so magnetic, and I'm talking about Fat Pat. He just had a certain presence on the mic. I mean, even when they were just, playing around, not even taking it seriously, you could tell he definitely had star quality. But unfortunately, he passed away. He was killed, actually, before his time, before he really was able to, I feel like, be the superstar that he was destined to be.
About a week before his album came out, his first album. Yeah, he was killed.
But this is definitely a Houston classic. I'm going to share it with you guys right now. Gotta have that intro.
Gotta get
right?
the intro. Yeah.
Let's do it right. This is sampled by a Texas group, by the way, out of Dallas, Yarborough and People, if you didn't know. So we're keeping it all Texas here.
Welcome to the land where the just don't stop. Trunks pop, tops, drops in the front end hot. Paint flop, screens on, that can bed in the song. Yeah, it's on, riding home, ballin' at my home. Test place, don't hate, showing up in the state. Can't wait, get it straight while the front end break. Paint the couch, speed the box, looking good when I float. Sunshine, let it down, turn it up and climb. Roll around, hit your block, trunk going online. Let it up, let it pop, light up the whole block. Southside, how we hold on a gangster stroll. Music hitting so hard, knocking outside mode. Get the highway, cruise control, gon' let it roll. Roll up the drink, fired up and show the windows closed. Home, home, high slide, going up the south side. You begin this day, I'm coming down, breaking the slab.
Representing the South Side.
You know, the really amazing thing about DJ Screw wasn't that he sold lots of tapes, and it wasn't even that he made lots of tapes. It was that he created a lot of people. He touched a lot of people. He touched everybody that came around him, but he also made careers for people who we probably wouldn't otherwise know, people who never probably would have been rappers, who came into his life. He was a Yoda kind of person. He had this energy. He had this calming effect on people and brought people together and really brought the best out in people the way that a good musician does. I think DJ Screw was a great drummer who never ended up playing the drums. I think he had a rhythm and a feel that created something and inspired something in people that really was amazing and really special. And that's why his legacy is so strong. That's why his legacy, is so strong today. The record store he opened up in 1998 is still open. DJ
Right.
Screw's been dead for 16 years. This record store only sells his records, and they're still open.
Right.
And that's a testament to the way that Houston truly loves his legacy, truly loves him, truly loves what his music stands for, and how it reflects the way that this city feels. Because you listen to that music, and you drive around the city, and that's what this city feels like.
True.
I think what's cool about that is, if you've seen the documentary, the show on Netflix called The Get Down, it's about like DJ culture and how the DJ is the center. And I just thought about I would argue that DJ Screw is one of the last DJ center collectives where from that you spawned many artists, and unlike Grandmaster Flash and DJ Wizard Theodore, it's not based off martial arts or whatever. This is uniquely Houston, uniquely Texas, and it's out of it's almost 20 years. It's out of place in what we think of in hip hop history or whatever. That the DJ being the center, that was something that was belonged to the early '80s.
So we're wrapping up right here, but I just want to pose a question to you guys, or if you can expound on this a little bit. Can you talk a little bit how much Houston hip hop has influenced the world? Just, certain things that are distinctly Houston and how we see it in other parts of hip hop. If you guys can kind of talk about that a little bit.
Well, it's interesting for me because I started working on my first book, Houston Rap, we started working on in 2005. Well, Peter Best, the photographer, started working on it in 2004. He brought me in late 2004, early 2005. And in late 2006, I moved to New York and then was working on the books from there, coming back. 2006, 2007, I remember mentioning Houston to people, and, most people yawn, Houston, God, why would you go there? Because if you don't have somebody to show you around this city, then it's just looks like a bunch of gas stations and strip centers and parking lots, and yeah, that's what it is. But there's other stuff hidden in there, and we have some trees too.
Definitely.
But I've noticed the more and more that, especially Screw sound, influences hip hop around the world, the more people talk about Houston differently. They're more interested in Houston because they start to understand the nuances of the music and how much there is to the music and how much of a culture is just, to them, buried in a city down here, down south. Oh yeah, by the way, it's the 4th largest city in the United States, and probably by the time they take the next census, it'll be the 3rd largest. I think the sound certainly is an influence. You listen to records slowed down, you hear it on the radio all the time. I hear the radio in New York, unfortunately, And sometimes you'll hear stuff slow down, and there's only one place that comes from. Of course, it comes from Daryl Scott. It comes from the earlier stuff in Houston. But as far as they know, it comes from DJ Screw, and that changes the way that people think about Houston. And it's a global audience. Mako knows this too. You sell books all over the world, and there are people all over Europe, all over the world who swear by Screw and love his sound and come here. The people that was at Screwed Up Records and Tapes yesterday, and they were telling me about a guy who flew to Houston from Germany and figured out how to take the Metro bus to Screwed Up Records and Tapes to buy Screw tapes because that's where he wanted to go.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, in 1995, on DJ Screw's the first recorded album,
First
three,
album,
three in the morning. There's a song called "Pimp the Pen," which, and on there, Lil Keke says, "The world gonna drip candy and be all screwed up," and that was prophecy, and you can hear Screw on some mixtapes. We're gonna screw up the world. It's prophecy, and so. Like tomorrow, I'm on a podcast from a guy from Australia, and I'm like, "How did you hear about this?" And like, it's weird how far this goes. And this is Houston music in general, but in Houston hip hop is very isolated. It's very what's the word? This is an incubator, and I didn't realize how much this stuff spread. And so I just moved back from New Jersey, and there was a kid staying at the I call him a kid, he's like 20-something, that was staying at the house that I was staying at, and like he knew all of the raps from like the mid-2000s, and like he just glorified all this stuff, and I was like, wow, how did you know that? And then there's no rapper that raps right now that's mainstream that doesn't talk about sipping syrup or talk about the drugging culture here, or people are talking about coming down, and the vernacular created by 3-2 and Fat Pat and Little Keke are part of like everyday like language now, and what it do, that's part of everyday language now, and it went far, but Houston doesn't always get the credit like that. Justin Timberlake has a song that's Screw that plays at the Grammys. I remember when it happened, I sent a message to Julie and we tweeted about it that like, oh, DJ Screw is at the Grammys, but no one like gives credit for it, and it's this appropriation of a sound that no one really gives like credit to.
Well, we should say too that we started talking about this earlier about the North Side versus the South Side. Well, DJ Screw was South Side, and all the rappers on his tapes are South Side, without fail. I think maybe there's a couple of North Side rappers that didn't appear. Anyway, so by the time he's getting really popular in the mid '90s, there were a lot of North Siders who they wanted that flavor. They wanted to be able to rap like that. They wanted to be able to produce music like that, and that's how we get Swishahouse. That's how we get that whole movement from the North Side. And it shouldn't go without saying that like when Houston rap blew up in 2004, 2005, and artists like Mike Jones and Paul Wall and Slim Thug became international stars, and Chameleonaire, that was on the back of DJ Screw's sound, because that all stemmed from that Swishahouse movement that took several years to, like you said, incubate, and by the time anybody else finds out about it, those artists are really, really good at what they do, and so yeah.
Do we have time for questions or? Okay. Does anyone?
Y'all
have
ask
any
us some questions. Come on.
Please.
We'll wait.
Yes, ma'am.
Could some of you talk a little about the classic Ghetto Boys lineup and what the different members brought to it and how it may have reflected Houston?
Sure.
So the original Ghetto Boys lineup is GHETTO Boys was a guy by the name of Felton Polk, who went by K9 or Sir Rap-A-Lot, who was the brother of James Prince. Another guy was Keith Rogers, who went by
Sire Jukebox.
Sire Jukebox. And then you also have Oscar Ceres, who went by the name of Raheem. So that's the first iteration. Then once they have an album, you have a New Jersey transplant who Collins Laseth, who went by DJ Ready Red. And so he's the DJ and he also raps. Then he brought down one of his friends from New Jersey, Prince Johnny C, who's rapping on there, and then we have Keith Rogers. And so the first album has those three guys as MCs and a dancer by the name of Little Billy, who is their like hype man and dancer. By the next album, we have Rogers is out the door, DJ Ready Red is still there, and Prince Johnny C is out the door. Willie D was recruited to the group by James Prince, and then a guy by the name of Brad Jordan, who was at that time going by the name of DJ Action, is recruited to the group. And so and Bushwick Bill becomes a rapper at that time. Little Billy becomes a rapper. And then that album is called Gripping on Another Level. It is remixed and remastered, and some songs are changed once Rick Rubin, who was the co-founder of Def Jam Records, he likes the group, and Rick Rubin makes Gripping on Another Level, and the next album is called The Ghetto Boys, and so that's when it goes from GHETTO to GETO Boys. And then their next album, by that time, Collins Layself, DJ Ready Red is out the door. So the classic lineup that people know of is Scarface, Willie D, and Bushwick Bill. And then in 1994 or 93, 94, Willie D is out the group for a little bit, and Big Mike, who was a member of the Convicts with Mr. 3-2, he replaces Willie D, and he's on that album. But then Willie D comes back for the 1997 album. So that's the classic lineup when people think about the Ghetto Boys, is the Ghetto Boys that are on the cover of We Can't Be Stopped, which features Bushwick Bill, Willie D, and Scarface.
On a hospital gurney.
Yeah, on a hospital gurney.
After he shot his eye out, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Women in hip hop. Can you name some women who were an important part of this history that we're talking about, or are they a part of the future of Houston hip hop practice?
So there's a rapper by the name of Kim Davis who went by Choice. And so her picture was actually in the Pop-Up Museum. She puts out an album called The Payback, or
The Payback.
The
Big
Payback.
Payback.
The
Big
Payback. And so
Payback.
if we think of Little
1990.
Kim, Foxy Brown, Nicki Minaj, there before all of them was Choice, who when I listened to her album as an adult, I was wondering, like, why in the hell did I know this at that age? Yeah, she was one of the rappers, but
She was the first nasty female rapper,
Yeah,
really nasty, nasty lyrics. Like, that was the point.
Yeah.
Choice.
Yeah. So she's much produced.
Not the first female rapper, but the first nasty one.
Yeah, produced by Willie D, but she put out maybe 2 albums at that time, and so you can find a lot of her stuff on YouTube, and she has albums out there. But yeah, Kim Davis, who went by Choice.
And for the Screwed Up Clique, there was Shero, there was Anjali. Anjali Parker was a big part of that movement. There's not a whole lot. I mean, I did my 2 books on Houston rap, and I tried to dig as much as I could, but there weren't a whole lot. I think that's the future. I think so.
Well, in the 90s, there was Fliponia, and then later Persef One.
Persef One still, she's still active, yeah.
I mean, there have been a few female MCs still, but, just like, hip hop at large, when it comes to female MCs and groups, it's a male-dominated
There were a lot of women behind the scenes too.
Definitely.
In Houston over the years, producing and organizing and all kinds of stuff.
Definitely. Yes, sir.
What about Chicano rap, like South Park Mexican, Juan Gotti, those guys? I mean, they sort of staked out their own territory and did rather well with it. Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, there's a whole scene built around South Park Mexican. Of course, there's a sordid history that goes along with that. I mean, he's in prison now, but he's still inspired generations of rappers. And then we had Big Jerb, who was around, who had a whole movement around him that started, I guess, probably 5 or 6 years ago. He passed away last year, or was it earlier this year? Big Jerb. No, I think it was last year. Yeah, it was last year. So yeah, that's kind of a whole movement onto its own.
Chingo Bling.
What's it? Chingo Bling? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And what's interesting about Houston is also the home of what we call gospel or Christian rap. And so, which, I was writing an article earlier this year, and I just realized that over 25 years of gospel rap comes out of Houston, gospel rap, Christian rap, but they can't figure out the name for it. But Houston is a base for that. Just Houston is also a base for gospel music, and so this being a Sunbelt city, a urban South city with millions of churches, that there's a sound that comes out of that too, that has its own history of that. People always say, well, you wrote the definitive history of hip hop of Houston, hip hop in Houston. I was like, no, I didn't. And there's stuff that's still to be written from all of this, because not only are we still living it, but you can't put it all in one book.
Definitely. Anybody else? Well, on behalf, go. Right. The culture in general.
These weren't necessarily musician types. They were people who were just passionate about their culture.
Well, I personally feel like the whole circle of hip hop in Houston, it ranges. There were actual trained musicians who, were composing songs, self-taught, or, maybe they had a few lessons. And then there was that sort of organic, just sort of this is the feeling, this is the expression. Like I mentioned earlier, Houston has always had a definite foothold in hip hop culture at large, from the DJs to the graffiti writers to the b-boys, and it still exists. Don't get it twisted. We have everything that any other major city has. It's just sometimes you have to dig a little deeper to find it and to be rooted in it, but it exists here, and it's always existed.
Yeah. And I think what we find in the music, I try to define what is unique about Houston. So Houston is a city that since Texas was created in 1835 or 1845, but so this is a city built on capitalism, okay, and it's very independent. And so I think what you will find through all of Houston hip hop is this independence. So Slim Thug's first album is called Already Platinum, and so as a high school student, I went to high school with Slim Thug, and then he graduates. These guys are millionaires already because we are a city on the Gulf Coast where you can pop trunk and you can make a lot of money without major label deal. And then you have Southwest Wholesale, which is on the north side down the street from the high school I went to. And so independence is important. And so people from oil and gas, from in music and art, people we don't get the respect that we need. And so independence is part of it. Car culture is part of this Houston hip hop. We spend most of our time in our cars, and so they're rapping about that. They're rapping about neighborhood, they're the neighborhood superstars. So Haircut Joe, I've never met Haircut Joe, but I know who Haircut Joe is. They're rapping about the drugging culture here, mixing codeine, promethazine with Sprite and putting something in it to make it to make it sweeter. They're rapping about that. Then they're and they're also rapping about the prosperity, the Houston hip hop. Especially what became popular is very aspirational, and so it's about riding a riding slab because that's a status symbol. It's about having the best gold grill, that's a status symbol. It's about getting a certain type of woman, which is, helps define, one's masculinity. And it's just all like just everyday happenings that just so happen to go be popular. It identifies with people.
I also think, that's kind of the crosswords where people kind of get it mixed up as far as, okay, well, hip-hop's not music. All you're doing is talking. Well, that's what they come into the studio with. Fat Pat goes into the studio. What's he coming in with? Maybe he doesn't sing, although he did sing a little bit. Mm-hmm. Maybe he doesn't sing, maybe he doesn't play an instrument, but he's coming in there with this. I'm coming in there, I'm going to tell you my story. I'm going to tell you what I'm all about. I'm going to tell it to you from my heart. That's music. I heard an interview with Sinbad, the comedian, when he was talking about, he did a show one time and he had Miles Davis in the audience, and Miles Davis came up to him after. He said, "That thing you're doing up there, that's jazz. That's jazz. That's what you're doing up there." So hip hop in its own way, it's jazz, even if it's just your voice.